History Untold.
And we are live from America, and just outside the Matrix, it's time for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm Rachel Bevins, and this is The Backstory. Coming up on today's show, more than a dozen Palestinians are killed after Israel bombs ambulances outside of a hospital in Gaza. We'll take a look at the latest on the ground as the chief of Hezbollah speaks out and warns that this war has the power to reshape the future. Plus, we'll talk to a co-founder of Wikipedia about how the platform has changed in the 22 years since it was created, as the world is more online than ever before. Then, Hunter Biden is complaining again, big surprise there, this time claiming in a new op-ed that his illicit drug use was weaponized in a disinformation campaign against his father. We've got all that and more coming up here on The Backstory. Welcome to the show. It is Friday, November 3rd, 2023, and looking at those latest updates from the Gaza Strip, the death toll there is now up to 9,227 Palestinians killed by Israel's bombardment since October 7th, in less than 4 weeks. And when it comes to the latest updates there, Al Jazeera is reporting that many casualties are feared after an Israeli strike hit an ambulance convoy carrying wounded patients as it was leaving the Al-Shifa hospital. Israel has confirmed it bombed an ambulance in Gaza, alleging that Hamas was using the vehicle in a separate attack. Children are among the at least 14 Palestinians killed while escaping south along Gaza's coastal road. And the leader of Hezbollah spoke out and said that Israel is pursuing a goal it cannot achieve as he delivered his first public speech since the start of the war. Now, an estimated 3,000 Palestinians from Gaza who were working in Israel when the war started have been forced to return to the enclave. Thousands were believed to have gone missing amid a campaign of mass arrest after October 7th. And when it comes to the latest there, we actually spoke about this earlier with journalist Matthew Ehret, looking at the speech that was given by the chief of Hezbollah, also looking at how the United States continues to play a role in all of this with its support for Israel and where it goes from here. Let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Matthew Ehret, a journalist, director of the Rising Tide Foundation, founder of the Canadian Patriot Review, and senior fellow of American University in Moscow. Matthew, it's great to have you on the show today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you.
Now, we just heard a speech from the chief of Hezbollah. There were a lot of questions leading up to it about whether he was going to announce the start of a broader war against Israel or more action there. But instead, he warned that an attack on Lebanon would be the most foolish mistake in Israeli history. He referred to the current war in the Gaza Strip as a decisive historical battle with consequences that will reshape the future. What do you make of his rhetoric and the timing of this speech?
Well, I think that this is definitely a big dose of cold water that should be poured on the heads of anybody thinking in a grandiose way about a romanticized New World Order script that they wish to revive, that looked very pretty, perhaps, to some people in 1992. And as you know, this was something that had been warned by Zbigniew Brzezinski, that the only thing that could threaten the idea of a end of history world government order that was being brought online in the destruction that was the 1990s, and Zbigniew, I'm referring to his grand chessboard, was what he said was a potential alliance of Russia, China, and Iran. Of course, right now, he was saying that during the time when you had Richard Perle, Wolfowitz, everybody promoting the clean break doctrine for Benjamin Netanyahu over the dead body of Yitzhak Rabin and soon Yasser Arafat, whose Oslo Accord was destroyed. And that really called for ushering in the new age of regime change, right? In the entirety of the Middle East, and to prop up the Zionist state as an enforcer of a greater Israel. So that seemed to have no challengers in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. That's a very different world today, 20 years later. And Israel is acting in a way which I don't think even most Israelis who live in Israel right now are very happy with Netanyahu. They don't see that they're going to benefit by unleashing an entire hell on earth war, especially with the current administration, not just bombarding Palestine, but also launching attacks into Lebanon, into Syria. I hope to God that certain people with half a brain are hearing the Hezbollah leader's words and are realizing that they need to change their strategy, because this will get ugly as all sin, especially with Algeria voting to come in and support militarily the conflict there on the side of the Palestinians. This could escalate so fast, so quickly, and no one living in that region will benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that that's the concern even right now, as we're watching the death toll continue to rise in the Gaza Strip by the day. There's also the concern that death toll could rise exponentially if this becomes a broader regional conflict, even than just what it is right now. You know, it's interesting there because you talked about the challengers, or kind of the lack thereof, to Israel in the 1990s. Fast forward today, we've had, 20 plus years of this so-called war on terrorism, in which the U.S. has just wreaked havoc on the Middle East. And then you also have Israel actively bombing the Gaza Strip, expanding settlements in the West Bank, targeting people there. When it comes to the challenges that we're seeing today, how much of a role do you think that the United States has played in getting us to this point where so many across the region are now saying, okay, we're done putting up with this. Now is the time to stand up and fight back in a way?
Yeah, well, you reap what you sow, eh? I mean, there has been a strategy that has involved a lot of hubris. I don't even want to call it a strategy, but for the longest time, whatever the Anglo-Americans wanted to see unfold on the geopolitical playground, they were able to get without too much challenge or ado. The creation of Al-Qaeda itself, right, emerged out of a U.S. Decision amongst some Trilateral Commission operatives like Zbigniew Brzezinski and others, who were working to cultivate this new neocon virus inside of the Republican Party that really burst onto the scene just a few decades later. But they got that with in the early 80s with the funding of these radicalizing madrasas to create a proxy war for the Soviet Union. But now we got Al-Qaeda as a new thing created and then used and deployed by Anglo-American intelligence that was used to destabilize regimes that we don't like throughout the entirety of the next 30 years up until the very present day. It's just so much hubris. We wanted buildings to collapse, so buildings collapsed, and again, not many people had the courage to call out what was happening, what was being already said by the we need a new Pearl Harbor moment crowd of neocons, who, while they were writing clean break for Netanyahu, they were also writing a strategy for polarizing the Americans in such a manner that they would support the types of never-ending wars that they would normally not have supported unless they got that Pearl Harbor moment, which came online with 9/11. So all of this stuff is now coming home to roost, and I think that the world is so disgusted beyond. I mean, they've always been disgusted, but I think now that disgust is accompanying a sense of the emperor has no clothes. Before that, you could sort of maintain the illusion that the U.S. had a viable economy. They were still a strong power that could project their will onto the weak. And now everyone is sort of seeing that this is really an emperor that has no clothes. The financial system of the United States is bankrupt beyond belief, and their allies have no sovereignty. The people of Europe are being set up to die under an ideology of eat bugs and get rid of hydrocarbons, to the point that the U.S. is willing to bomb their own allies' pipelines. So I think that this is creating a healthy righteous indignation by the representatives of the majority of the world who don't want to take this anymore, don't want to eat this anymore, and are finally, they have the courage, I think, to see that there's something better and more reasonable in town with the Eurasian Economic Partnership and broader paradigm of security through win-win cooperation that has burst onto the scene in recent years, which is providing a viable, functional alternative, which hopefully won't get sabotaged by a holy war that could go bonkers, which is a concern I have.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair concern. And yeah, it's been interesting to see how we've had this conversation about the growing multipolar world, especially over the last year and a half with the war in Ukraine and the United States. And it's refusing to allow any kind of ceasefire or peace talks there, forcing this country to stay at war. And now we're in yet another situation where you've got the Biden administration saying, oh, we don't support a ceasefire, even as we're seeing that the majority of the casualties on the ground are civilians. Nearly half of them are children. And yet now we've gotten to a point where it's so bad that Biden's rhetoric has been to say, oh, well, we'll support a humanitarian pause. When it comes to what the Biden administration is putting out there, refusing to support a ceasefire that so many other countries around the world have called to, but then saying that they want some sort of a pause, what does that actually look like? And do we know what that would look like? And why do you think that they are taking this strategy?
It's really not coming from a point of strength, eh? I mean, I think it's betraying a lack of sense of having any authentic, real weight to bring to the table anymore. People have called out the bluffs. They sort of see the nakedness of this thing. I'm sorry for referring back to this naked emperor myth because nobody wants to imagine Joe Biden in that way. But I think that what we have is partially, the way I see it is kind of like a Frankenstein monster that's been created and has been unleashed, which is difficult to deal with once it's been released. And this is part of because like what is Hamas even in the first place, right? What is governing Benjamin Nentayahu and the most extremist factions of Zionists in Israel who believe in this greater Israel purged of Arabs logic? They're coming at it from an eschatological worldview that is cultivated and incubated by intelligence agencies that are themselves purely animated by geopolitical control concepts of the great game. They don't really, those who are, for example, shaping the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was created by a guy, al-Banna, back in the 1920s, who was being funded by the British Empire under the what's called the British Cairo office. So he was getting money to set up the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in the 1920s as a way to create a more extreme, religiously oriented movement that could create an umbrella that would absorb the entire Arab world into something that would be more foreseeable. You could know how it was going to react in a more violent oriented manner. It tried to kill, President Nasser. He had to ban them completely. They did kill Anwar Sadat. They've been used as U.S. proxies for a long time, including into the Arab Spring to overthrow Mubarak. And they're not the same thing as Al-Qaeda, but there's a lot of overlap too. As far as the Salafist Wahhabite, variant, which the British and the American intelligence junior partners prefer to have representing the Arab world. And if you look at Hamas, I mean, Chaz Freeman, the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, even made a very clear point on many occasions that this was created by Israeli Shin Bet and American intelligence in 1987 because they wanted to offset Yasser Arafat and the PLO, who were much more secular, had a much more pragmatic, economically driven orientation for finding peace, terms of peace through development with the Jewish neighbors. Hamas was not into that, and they were thus more predictable. They would give an excuse by their orientation towards acting in a more like, let's purge the land of Israelis, in a way that would give those Israelis receiving money and support militarily from their U.S. sponsors more of an excuse to go in and act like victims that were, trying to defend themselves by purging the land of Arabs. So we've been played with this game, and again, it's a bit eschatological. Like this, there's a view that there's a divine commandment at the end times that the world will be given back to the chosen people. Says a certain variant of, and this is not all Jews, but the ones that are cultivated and given power. And there's a certain view as well of a global caliphate purged of infidels as well from those who receive support by the Zbigniew Brzezinskis out there and are ultimately useful at maintaining constant conflict. But again, once you release that genie from the bottle, it's hard to put it back in. And I think some of this stuff is getting a little out of hand because now you have the U.S. has been pulled into something that could actually see an unleashing of an escalation into nuclear war. There's the neocon Christian Zionists who believe that the end times are here and that we have to help out the end times and fulfill prophecy as they interpret their particular reading of the texts of the Bible, which is not even, it's highly interpretive, but that's their choice to interpret it that way. And that will involve an end times Armageddon scenario unfold in the Middle East. And they've got a whole interpretation that Russia is, you know, Megiddo or Gog. And these are people with power, like Lindsey Graham. And that's very concerning that that's there. And I think that some of the more sober-minded geopolitical imperialists are a little are kind of freaking out that there is something that might undo the clean model of this new world order that they were working with for decades on paper that looked so nice. And now it's like, no, when theory and reality hit together, reality doesn't behave the way your theory wants. And yeah, the only sane game in town is coming out of Russia, China, and the Eurasian allies. I just don't see any sane discussion from the transatlantic.
Yeah, it's been very telling. I think from, going back to October 7th, you had countries like Russia and China coming forward saying, hey, we need a ceasefire. We also need the recognition of some sort of Palestinian state so that we don't keep running into this time and time again. And then you have the United States just saying, we stand with Israel, sending Tony Blinken to Tel Aviv every other week, it seems. It's almost like he's moved there because he's constantly there. But when it comes to their overall rhetoric, it is nothing but support, right? They're going to pass $14 billion worth of aid for Israel, and they may throw in a little bit of humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people. They may act like they care and want some sort of a pause, but the overwhelming message is there, and it does create concerns for people like, as you noted, Lindsey Graham, who is willing to get on TV and say that there is no number of civilian casualties that will make him question Israel. That to me is just insane to think that about any country, let alone this one and everything that they've done to the people in the Gaza Strip and how they are still being targeted there. But when it comes back to, the speech that we heard from the chief of Hezbollah, he's talking about the group's objectives in this battle are ultimately to stop the aggression on Gaza and to ensure that Hamas, quote unquote, achieves victory against Israel. In this case, do you think that, this victory that he's talking about, is it just about protecting this piece of land, or is there more to it? And does it play into that broader frustration that the region has with Israel being able to do whatever it has wanted and to torture these people for decades? And they're finally saying, okay, we've had enough of this. We're not putting up with it any longer.
Well, the fear that I have is that you're on both sides. If we keep within the Hobbesian domain of power projection with a religious sort of twist to our feelings and our thinking and strategizing, this will only de-escalate, because this will only escalate. There was, as far as I could see it, the only sort of sane orientation, not that this was a just final phase, but the only sane orientation that I could see in the recent months was the attempts to provide peace through development discussions that would broker peace deals by providing incentives for rivals in the Middle East to stop fighting each other and start building adult discussions. And we saw that with China's role in brokering, in large measure, the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The same thing with Saudi Arabia and Iran, having begun to heal their relations, Syria being re-entered back into the Arab League. There's so many different points that were giving me great optimism, and still do, largely through, again, the incredible offers through the Belt and Road Initiative and all of its thousands of sub-projects in the Middle East for reconstruction that tie into Africa. Really good stuff. And part of that involved, the most challenging one is the basket case known as, Israel mostly, not all of Israeli people again, but the idea of the normalization of relations between Israel and their other Arab neighbors was a very important thing that was moving ahead quite well before October 7th. The concepts also of restoring a type of dialogue that we had last seen in the 90s between Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat that would not just restore the pre-1967 borders, but tie it into economic development of water, infrastructure, putting people who have all this animosity to work, building something for their kids. That was a constructive orientation, which is why the Anglo-Americans derailed it throughout the 1990s. Again, murder of Yitzhak, the murder of Yasser by poisoning later on destroyed all of that. And but that was coming back online. A new space was being made possible for this to happen. And now I'm not seeing even a desire to get back to that. I don't know what the end game was, even with Hamas's decision to select this moment in time to launch their first fight back against the oppressive force of the Israelis. I don't know what their end game goal was, except eliminate Israel. You want them to go away as a state that doesn't exist anymore. That seems to be part of what they want. That I don't think is very constructive, because there are people with power and nuclear bombs in Israel who are willing to burn the earth before they let that happen. So I think I'm not seeing enough of that sort of clear-headed adult type of discussion, both within the Hamas leadership or other Arab neighbors around them who are trying to get some sense. And it's hard when you're dealing with something as insane as what we're seeing with Benjamin Netanyahu. I admit this is the hardest thing, because there is a desire to sabotage any ceasefire. Which again, it brings up what you were saying about how the U.S. and Israel, with 14 other countries of the NATO cage mostly, all rejected a very reasonable call by the UN to have a ceasefire. Who would say no to that? You're going to release the hostages? You're going to get a dialogue? They said no. They don't want that. So what do they want? Nobody seems to be very clear on their objectives at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, when it comes to the countries that are acting like adults in the room here, speaking about, Russia and China kind of leading this charge of calling for a ceasefire, as you're noting there, they've also been the ones who have called for constructive dialogue in a number of regions. What is the message that sends versus the message that the U.S. sends, where it basically comes in and says, you either do what we want or else we're going to sanction you, bomb you, overthrow your government, completely ruin, your society as you know it? And do you think that people are waking up to the difference in the rhetoric that they're seeing, and that it's affecting who they want to work with moving forward?
Yeah, no, it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, I think that people have been just suffocating under the weight of empire now for so many decades that when they see nations representing civilizational states that are coming into their world, into their region with a different philosophy of self-interest, because everybody's operating out of self-interest, right, at the end of the day. But there's certain definitions or certain concepts of self-interest that are actually counterproductive and destroy the overall security of those who have a Hobbesian idea of self-interest, like my ability to gain dominance over the weak, to steal from the poor to satisfy my my right to rule. That idea of self-interest is ultimately always going to create more divide to conquer, more animosity, more desires for people to get revenge on those who wronged them. And this is what took down the Roman Empire. It doesn't work. It never works. And China and Russia have, I think, really learned from the lessons of history, with Iran increasingly as well, who have shown so much restraint, not falling for geopolitical traps that have been set for them over years to try to provoke them into some sort of an eye for an eye type of reaction. So much restraint. And the fact that they're now offering real economic, genuine development, full spectrum industrial development for nations who have been kept in scarcity and want in order to keep them desperate and more easy to either exploit or to keep fighting with their neighbors in a state of fear. That I think is just such a breath of fresh air. And even though there was a lot of poor countries like in Africa who for a number of years were saying, well, I don't really know. And do we want another big country to be another empire? Better to stick with the devil we know, right? That was something we'd heard a lot of. But now that we're actually seeing the measurable effects of China's very different approach than that which we had seen by the U.S. and the Anglo-American sort of NATOites. We're actually seeing real sanitation systems, rail, other things, the training of trade schools, the training of people with engineering skills in Africa and other regions that are doing business with China. It doesn't mean China's an angel. It just means that they've got a clear grasp of that it's better business to not kill your neighbors and to have development. It's better business. And yeah, it happens to be moral too. Bonus. But, I think that people have a lot of hope right now that this finally can be challenged. This whole thing, this parasite that's been, latched onto humanity for thousands of years, try to get us to, get trapped into systems of self-destruction, divide to conquer, feudalism. There's finally a serious challenge by a coalition of very different civilizations that have all agreed that there's something universal that binds them together and that can provide the world something different that can float and not be designed to sink.
Yeah, that hope is certainly needed more than ever right now. Now, bringing it back to the U.S. and this destructive foreign policy that we continue to see, we've got the House passing over $14 billion in aid for Israel yesterday. Both Biden and top Democrats in the Senate say that they won't pass it because it doesn't include the rest of Biden's $106 billion wish list that includes funding for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, really any avenue that they can get to World War III is what it feels like they're going for. Yeah. How do you see this fight playing out? And do you think that there's members of Congress who are just so desperate for that support for Israel that they will pass that first and foremost and then leave the other wars on the back burner, at least for now?
It's fascinating, eh? I mean, just to see the system self-implode under its own self-contradictions. They've again, yeah, like there's these interesting effects that we're noting, and you've just laid it out very, very nicely. That for the longest time, everything that this financier oligarchy wanted, they got without any real resistance, and now they've come to a place where even just passing a funding bill is not working anymore. Johnson, for all of his insane problems, has made the point that it doesn't seem like they're going to budge on the issue of funding Ukraine unconditionally, as has been the case. There's an obsession with cutting the budget, which in the case of, like, I kind of get a chuckle out of seeing the fights inside the Congress right now regarding the fact that these people around Johnson are saying, yeah, okay, we'll fund the Israelis, but only if we, cut out the IRS funding. That I kind of enjoy that, but it's the system eating itself. I don't think that there's any end game goal. One side just wants to is ideologically committed to cutting the budget and everything. The other side is committed to printing infinite money to bail out banks while printing more infinite money to pay for never-ending wars that are designed to kick over the chessboard at the end of the day because they're losing and they can't win. I think that that's sort of what an empire in crisis always does. And whether it's Taiwan or Ukraine or now in the case of the Middle East, I think there's kind of a drive on some elements within within Washington and the higher head in Britain, in London, that I see as sort of like actually shaping the scenes, but that's another discussion. To literally just try to deal with the economic collapse, the inevitable systemic breakdown that we're living through by not addressing it, just creating a new all-out set of wars that'll and hopefully try to pick up the pieces of chaos after the fact, but ignoring the fact that the world has thousands of nuclear weapons, or at least not paying, I think, proper respect to the fact that once that's used, if you start that ball rolling, I don't think that what's worked for thousands of years, order out of chaos, that type of strategy, it always kind of worked. But now we got nuclear weapons, and it's not going to, I don't think they're not realizing that they can't take the logic of the last 1,000 years and apply it now to this new system or this new setup. So there's I think a lot of infighting, a lot of evidence of internal conflicts within the Western oligarchical administrators who don't have an agreement or a consensus on what they should be doing with each step that passes, causing, I think, what you've noted is a lot of almost disgustingly hilarious contradictions, messaging, there's, again, just no coherence. So that's something to be hopeful for in some weird way, I guess.
Exactly. Hey, we'll take what we can get at the moment. There's certainly a lot at stake here all around, but I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and I hope to have you back on soon. Matthew Ehret, journalist, director of Rising Tide Foundation, founder of Canadian Patriot Review, and senior fellow of American University in Moscow. Thank you so much for your time and insight today.
Always a pleasure.